Hello, everybody, and welcome to our epic X-Men reread here on Crushing Comics. I am here with my friends Tyler and Fariha, and we are reading X-Men from Giant Size X-Men forward through the classic Claremont years. For Tyler and I, it is not the first time, but Fariha, it is. So we're having the great experience of seeing it again through the first time through her eyes, although she is not a New Mutant anymore, folks. She has read several hundred issues of X-Men at this point. She's even as mean as most X-Men fans are. She's really growing into her role in X-Men.
Absolutely. I've completely embraced the X-Men fan persona.
And hating it all, right? You have to be mean.
Yeah.
You got to do a little bit of gatekeeping. You got to hate it. Not really. We're not mean. We don't.
And then I also have my favorites. I also like what have complaints about oh, that character would never eat that.
You need a super obscure favorite to complete the journey, like somebody who never ever turns up, but then when they turn up, you're like, well, the issue is good because X, Y, Z was there.
Well, I think I'm getting there. But we'll chat more.
We'll chat about that. So here's a few things for you to know. In this episode, we're going to cover Uncanny X-Men 122 through 124. It's their classic first encounter with Arcade. We're also going to talk about backup stories in classic X-Men 29 and 30, which fit just after this story. Technically, we also could do Marvel Team Up 89 here, but we're going to save that for the next episode for reasons. And if you're trying to follow along, this is all based on the reading orders that are on my site, crushingcrisis.com. They're part of my complete X-Men reading order of everything from before the Silver Age all the way up to Avengers versus X-Men in 2012. I'm actually working to revise and expand it a little bit right now to make sure that there's nothing missed. So it takes you through every issue, not just as it happened, but in a comfortable way to read it. So you're not switching mid-issue, which I just don't find to be very fun. I don't know, maybe some of you out there like that kind of thing. Before we start talking about Arcade, though, I thought it'd be a fun chance to talk about our favorite games, right? Because Arcade, he could just kill people. That's an option. But instead, he has this elaborate murder world where he tortures them for fun and he guarantees their death, which we really never see. His kill count is very, very low in the history of comics. So I thought this would be a fun chance to just talk about what some of our favorite games were, either as a kid to play or games that we now play as an adult. We've already talked a little bit about Dungeons and Dragons, so we'll table that one. Fariha, do you have a favorite game or favorite memory of gaming?
Right. So the thing is, when I was young, little, I used to play, video game, but those were not video, they were played in the PC. Nothing like what you can see modern, because now if you look at them, you as if you were controlling people. But back then it was those little pixel thing. So Hocus Pocus was one that was my favorite, which is pretty much this little thing just running around and you're grabbing a bunch of white balls.
You're
and
doing
then,
a side-scrolling game, right?
Yeah, that's what it's called? And then you reach the end. The one that Prince of Baghdad, is that the one? The Prince of Arabia. There was another
which
one.
at the time seemed like so cool, but now you look back at the graphics and you're like, oh.
Yeah. and with that one, I think I never went past a fifth level of something, because at that time I didn't know cheats that you can look up or anything. But the one that I played so much, and then it was a very interesting thing because it would be me playing it and my sisters would be around me, is Sims. And then we would create these families in the house and everything. And sometimes we would get mad at my sister because she was hogging the computer for too long. So I would log in as her and I would kill her family by putting them in a bathroom and not let them pass.
You murdered your sister's Sim family.
Yes, I did. But she also murdered mine. So,
well, that makes it okay.
Yeah, that makes it okay. It was a revenge. But apparently Sims have also now come so far, because at that time you couldn't have a family of two mothers or two fathers, but now you can. And so I was like, oh, how far how far things have come. I haven't played more modern Sims though, but that's just my, so yeah, so that was my story.
Tyler, what about you? Do you have a game story to share with us?
This is going to age me quite a bit. When I was growing up, there was no computer games. Because
there weren't. I mean, I didn't have a computer until I was in high school. I didn't have computer games.
So something that is a little bit more nostalgic for me would be Chinese checkers. I'm not sure if you know what it looks like.
Yeah,
you do, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, I think the thing that is that's nostalgic for me, because I think that is one of the first game that I played with my sister and my mom. So my mom taught me how to play, when I was really young. And yeah, I mean, my dad didn't play because he was working all the time. I mean, I did not grow up like rich or anything. So my dad was working pretty much um, long hours, and he was working overseas too. So on an oil rig or something like that.
Mm.
So I didn't. I mean, he will come back like every 3 months or so, and then spend like 2 weeks with us. So yeah, but I think yeah, nostalgia wise, it is like Chinese checkers.
Nice.
I often think that I'm like exactly the right age to really remember the progression of games because we didn't have much money, and at one point we're quite poor as a kid. And so I never had like the newest system when it was the newest system, but I would have something that like my dad got from a friend or something. So when I was a kid, I still had like the original Atari with like the little joystick and the one
Yeah.
button, So
Yeah.
I remember playing, even though that had been around probably since the late 70s. I'm not quite that old to have had it when it came out, but that's the point. And so when I think of my initial favorite games, it was like Joust. I could play Joust for an endless amount of time. Those little pixel birds and the little pterodactyl would come, and you had to get it like right in the mouth with the jousting thing to kill it, and it'd make this noise like this little pixel scream. And so and then I was around through Nintendo and Super Nintendo and et cetera, et cetera. But I think I think of going to arcades. Of course, I think of the classic X-Men arcade game with the 6 players because I was addicted to that. But I also, there's this game, I never remember what it's called, but it had a paddle, like a spin wheel, and you had to bounce the ball off of it to kind of like shatter all the tiles up at the top. And I was obsessed with that because at the time, it wasn't like you could have a specialized controller at home. So even if you had a game kind of like that on your Atari or whatever, it didn't have the little spin wheel the way that you could have at the arcade. So if I saw that in a bar or an arcade, do you know what it's called, Tyler?
Yeah, I can't remember the name, but I know what you mean.
But I played it.
It's like the brick.
Yes.
You destroy the brick block or something like that. I can't
So
remember.
it's like kind of like an anti-Tetris.
Yes. And I remember
it's like a negative Tetris.
Yeah, because you're trying to like, and you can't let the balls fall, but sometimes you get extra, and sometimes you can like shoot little lasers and stuff.
Right.
And I remember I'd play with my dad, but I was not coordinated enough to do the side to side thing. So we would just always try to get to the point that you get lasers. So I could just like pound the laser button, and then he would just do the paddle back and forth. And that's like one of my big kind of going to an arcade game memories as a kid. So we're here to talk about these X-Men issues, and we're talking about games, of course, because of arcade. But issue 122 doesn't start really with arcade. It kind of winds up at the arcade story because it starts out with Colossus in the Danger Room. It actually has a super iconic cover of Colossus with this hydraulic vise that's closing in on him, that a lot of times Colossus figures actually will come with like a part of this because it's just one of those really, really classic Colossus puzzles and or classic images. And the whole theme is that Cyclops is trying to push him really hard, but Colossus is being resistant. And so Wolverine, in a new development for him, takes interest in the training, goes down to the Danger Room, and basically just sits in the middle. And he's like, well, you're either going to make it work or I'm going to get squashed.
Yeah.
What do we think about Wolverine taking an active interest in Colossus's training?
This is like the birth of Wolverine, the teacher.
It is really. It's the first time we ever really see that.
Yeah, I mean, I keep on saying that, make him the teacher for young mutants rather than have him run around. But this is why, because he actually makes a good teacher. I mean, his method can be a little bit questioning at times, because it's like, okay, what if Colossus really could not do it? Then he would be squished. You'd be okay, buddy, but we know what you can do. But he would be squished. So I mean, that's one of the reasons. Like, I think this issue I really liked it because of that, because it was like just a personal interactions, and then there's a downtime. They're doing some things and stuff like that, getting phone service back in the mansion. That is important. So they're doing that kind of thing. And so from that point of view, I think I really liked that. And then there was this whole toolkit that got handed to him. It's like, okay, now you go fix it. I'm like, well, is Wolverine the right person to fix it? I don't know about that.
And then he has this fuming thing on his head, on top of his head, like angry,
so and then also this is it feels like this is also first time that I mean, not necessarily the first time, but Colossus starts to question his his existence as an X-Men, and also
Yeah.
his doubt about Mother Russia and all of that, which we're gonna talk a little bit later more about it. But I think it was balanced well between the two things, like between the two characters.
I mean, he was feeling a little bit homesick, I think, Colossus here. So they were playing, they were playing that particular angle. But what struck me as, I mean, this is classic Claremont, right? Because you have so many things going on at the same time with different characters, and each one gets a little bit of snippets here and there, and some of it, will not resurface until a while later. But that's what he does really well. And I think the other thing that he does that goes when he does something like that, the transition from each scene to the other also works pretty well. Like
I love how he does that. He's like, he doesn't just say meanwhile. He actually like will make a sentence that starts in the previous page and kind of ties into the other plot, and the art maybe reflects it a little. Like there's this beautiful transition here of Cyclops, talking to Colleen Wing, but his mind maybe is elsewhere, and it fades into the side of his face being this field of stars, and then we go to the Professor X story. I love that, and it's very Claremontian.
Yeah. So I mean,
I noticed that too.
And that's why I think I mean, not to spoil it, but like the two writers, the two current writers that sort of emulate him in this respect, one does it much better than the other. I think mainly because the transition was handled much better by one writer than the other writer. So
so we do transition here into another scene, which is Professor Xavier in space, right? Because he thought all of his people were dead. And so he, Jean went off on her rejuvenation, live, pray, love, whatever vacation that she goes on. And Xavier goes to space to just be the holy consort of Lilandra as she retakes her throne. And so we get some really interesting material here, just a page of it, of Xavier kind of not having a place. He's so used to being in charge of things. He's so used to being the smart one. And he's kind of just like a kept man here in space. Fariha, what did you think about Xavier the consort? Xavier the space gigolo.
Yeah. It's so funny. But the thing is, I think it works better with the classic X-Men backup story. I think 30 or 31, like one of the, I think that this scene literally translates into that. And I think that once I read that, then that it kind of made more sense. But I'm like, well, it's kind of vacation. I mean, just take it as it is. But at the same time, I was like, he left things unfinished. And I'm like, oh, that is such character, like on point character moment. Like, it's always Xavier's like that. He leaves everything unfinished and then just goes off. Like, I was like, yeah, well, there you are.
I really like it. Like just how it's one page and then you sort of understand what's going on and you get this like sort of unwritten kind of like, okay, we know how Xavier is feeling, and then it's just quickly we just like, okay, let's go on to the next scene.
Speaking of going on to the next scene, we have a scene of Jean now having finally landed in Scotland, and she runs into this person on the street, Jason Wingard, who wants to help her with her packages. Now, we deliberately skipped a classic X-Men backup story in classic X-Men 24 because we wanted to see this scene first and get closer to the Phoenix Saga. So we're still not talking about that story. No. So at the time, this is where you think this is happening first. Claremont later kind of installs more runway. Yeah. Fariha, having not read the rest of it, even though you do know who this character is, what did you think of this this man and his awful mutton chops who flirts with Jean on the street here? Like, how does this scene come off?
But I feel bad though that I kind of know who this is, so I don't want to spoil it for people who don't. But the thing is, in a recent issue, we saw this character, and then I kind of looked up what this is. Then I remember the name, and then I'm like, oh, it's that guy. So I'm like, Jean, no, don't talk to him, run. So it was it all kind of went into that. So I was like, oh man, I wish I didn't know, but now I know. And now I'm like,
yeah, but then
did
you notice the shadow?
Huh?
Did you notice the
Say it again?
shadow? Did you
Yeah,
notice
I
the shadow?
did. Yeah, I did. Because I was looking for this kind of thing, because I was looking for like clues because of the name. So
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm like, So I think it's kind of fun in that way because I
Yeah.
already know. So I'm looking for these things already.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
but then we also saw the two fishermen or boatmen. They
Yeah.
were looking for their friends
Yeah,
who
Angus
has
McSquirty.
disappeared.
What is his name? McWhirtle.
Whatever
Yeah.
the
Mac.
McWhirtle,
Yeah.
Who
his
knew
his
that the bigoted boat renting guy was going to continue to be such a plot point throughout the entirety of classic Claremont X-Men?
I mean, as of right now, there's like 3 issues that we talked about this guy. But
it's not the end either.
Oh no,
Yeah.
I know it's not the end either. But then so and then also like I don't know. I mean, like he was so there's this all of this, and then it's like he's a handsome devil. I'm like Gene, no, girl, no, no that guy with this weird mutton, no, come on.
Well, those thoughts may not entirely, or she might not have seen what we saw necessarily. The character does mention the Hellfire Club, and I think what's interesting here is even if we don't know who he is and we're playing coy here, although you probably know as listeners, it shows that someone else is interested in Jean and Jean's level of power. And clearly somebody else who's been reading the headlines understands that X-Men are still around, because surely that adventure in Japan made headlines. And so the world doesn't think the X-Men are dead. Only Jean does. But Jean has kind of been like separated from the pack right now. And there's other people who've noticed her level of power. And I just think that's, we're still a bit ahead of that happening, but, Claremont's seeding some stuff that's really going to come to fruition 12 or more issues from now.
But the thing is like, that's why you should read newspaper, because none of these people know anything. And that's also something that I was also kind of thinking about. I'm like, do they not like, no connection, nothing. They're just here. And I mean, I don't know. I mean, in modern world, it probably wouldn't have worked given that you're all connected to your phone and stuff. But I guess story point.
But like, even when you are in, say for example, for the two of us, Fariha and me, we are in the United States. They don't really report international news.
Ooh. Yeah, but at the same time, we do find like giant news, right? And that was a big news, international big news, right? So that's what I was talking about.
No, I mean, but it all depends on like what kind of news you listen to, right? Like if let's say you only listen to the local news and you scan headlines. Even nowadays, like the headlines, they localize it for you, so that unless you specifically seek international news, you probably don't know much about that.
Well, we're in an environment now where all news is much more curated, right? Like
right. No, but the local news, we know.
Yeah.
No, I'm just saying, knowing what we know about Moira, she should probably done a better job about news.
Well, Moira might have had her own reasons not to tell Jean that the X-Men are alive. So now we come to the plot that I think maybe takes up the most space here. It's strange. I don't have a lot to say about it. Storm decides she wants to revisit her childhood apartment, which is like the kind of thing they do sometimes on Behind the Music, whatever. I remember Madonna one time went back to the apartment that she lived in New York, and I understand that. Or like Paul McCartney with James Corden went back to his house. It's just a thing that famous music superstars do, and also Storm. And so Storm goes back to her apartment that she lived in with her parents until the age of 6 or however old they were when they went back to their home in Egypt. And it's a worse neighborhood now, and it turns out that it's a drug den, and everybody's in there shooting up, and Storm is besieged by druggies, and she can't handle herself. But luckily, Iron Fist and Power Man show up, or actually just Power Man, because this is Claremont writing a scene with all the black characters. Claremont's given it to us because fans demanded it. Probably like, I'm sure there were probably letters at that time that were like, don't all these black characters know each other? I'm like, oh boy. So he gives it to fans, and we get Luke Cage and Misty saving Storm from the drug den. Does anyone have anything they want to say about this scene?
Knowing what her relationship with Morlocks right later in the round. I'm like, this is the start of that. Is a question mark. Like this is kind of where she gets the kind of like an idea of it.
I think you could argue that it's Storm understanding more about the class system of America. I mean, she's been very much on the campus this whole time.
Yeah.
And she to her, it's this land of plenty. Everybody wants her to put clothes on. And this is one of the first times that she's like really having to experience that there's people who are left behind. Does this get explicitly referenced with the Morlocks? I don't think so.
No.
But you could absolutely, talking about her emotional arc, think of this as like her rude awakening to the kind of seedier underneath part of American life. I don't know. Tyler, what do you think?
I mean, I thought this was just like a social commentary, somewhat of that time, and I definitely noticed that Claremont uses like 3 African American or Black people in this scene, and the other thing I was also paying attention to was how many names that they could scribble onto the walls. Because I think they scribble a lot of like creators, probably the Marvel Bullpen, like everybody's name is like somewhere there on the walls in different panels. So
Right.
yeah.
But thank God not all the drug people were Black people.
Yeah.
Thank God for that. Like, oh, okay. So
well, I think
this is like a mixed race drug den.
He's sensitive enough, I think, to not do that. I think.
Right.
Yeah. And also, I think without having done much historical reading to prepare for this, I do think it's somewhat of a commentary too on like the social class aspect of the drug abuse that was in New York. So you have to think that Marvel's offices were in New York, and so like all of these writers probably had a lot of opinions about this kind of thing,
Definitely.
and they want to kind of insert what New York is really like for the rest of the country to see, and this is Claremont doing that.
It didn't feel out of place though. It also didn't feel out of character for Storm. So, so from that point of view, I'm like, oh, that's nice.
Yeah. I mean, they definitely fit in quite nicely, and it's a downtime, and she's like really trying to explore her heritage and everything. So
right. What is out of character though is giving a key to your friend's boyfriend, like that that is alive.
I know.
Let's talk about it.
Or gentlemen, don't do that.
She's like, don't open this until I get on the train.
Yeah.
And so Colleen Wing gets on the train and Cyclops opens it and it's a key to her apartment.
Yeah, and it's like, drop by any old time. Well, what if you're not there? This is not the era of cell phone. Like, how do I know that you're gonna be there or not? I mean, I don't know. That whole thing, I was like, oh, I mean, yeah, it's just like it only can happen in fiction, because in real world, it will never happen. So this actually proves that with all the fixing phones and everything, he never brought up Jean once. He never talked about Jean once, or he never said that I'm so sad that she's dead, like, or I miss her so much. Then Jean will be then Colleen will be like, well, really, why do you miss her? Like, what's going on?
This is also like the point where Cyclops is getting a little bit more relaxed.
Yeah, my question here is Colleen better for Cyclops than Jean? Should we be shipping Cyclops and Colleen all this time?
No, don't put Cyclops on Colleen. Like, she doesn't deserve it. Like,
but I feel like he's like a mellower person with her, and not because she's like fixing him, but because he's like allowed out of this insular world, this X-Men only world, where every conversation has to do something with the X-Men, right? It's like, don't date your colleagues.
Or do you think it's because Professor X doesn't have a hold on him anymore?
Oh, you think because Professor Xavier's not there giving him anxiety dreams?
Yeah.
Exactly. Maybe that's why. Like, because Professor, no matter where he is, he's just intruding randomly, giving him orders randomly. And now he doesn't have that anymore.
Think of all these X-Men who like really thought that they had intrusive thoughts all this time and probably had their own therapy sessions with Professor Xavier, who's like, oh, intrusive thoughts, that's really concerning. And really it was just Professor Xavier like randomly just sending them little bursts of images to make them all think that they were, you know, not well. And then they get away from him and they're like, gosh, like I really feel like I'm under control right now. I'm not having like all these problems thinking about things just popping into my head at random times. No, it's just because Professor Xavier's in space.
Yeah, and then you know, Tyler and I know about a little bit. We were raised by Asian moms, so you know, when we kind of went on to live our own, we're like, things feel a little less stressful. So we kind of know. We are speaking from experience. But I don't know. I mean, the whole thing with the keys and everything, I'm like, yeah, maybe she is better for him. They are better and whatever. But it's just like, it's not reconciled well. It's not. It presented in such a bad way that it's like, and then same issue, Wolverine is like, Merrick was in town? What? Like,
yeah,
you know,
what about Jean?
Yeah, I'm like, does anybody think about Jean?
I guess I just like it because Colleen has the agency. It's not like Cyclops pining for her. It's her being like, listen, dummy, here's my key.
Yeah,
you can come over.
Right. No, I absolutely agree from that point of view. It's perfect, but it's just like, she knows she's alive.
Well,
like, you know,
that's the thing.
From that point of view, it's like...
That's a weird thing, yeah.
Well, look, there's only one... There's only
I really wish she didn't know. You know, then it would be fine.
There's only one relationship in this issue that's going to last forever. Where two people are meant to be together and nobody's ever really going to come between them, even when they're separated. And that relationship is between the Black Tom and Juggernaut.
Oh.
Juggernaut has apparently fished Black Tom out of the sea where we last saw them.
Yeah.
Actually, maybe he's appeared elsewhere. I didn't check Juggernaut's chronology. In X-Men, anyway, he was in the sea. And they've decided they're not going to try to fight the X-Men directly before. They're going to use Black Tom's wealth and resources to hire somebody who perhaps could be more competent than the two of them. Spoilers, that's not the case. And the person they hire is the Carrot Top of the Marvel Universe himself. That would be Arcade.
Yeah.
In a really fun reveal, where Arcade has made up a custom deck of playing cards. It's part of his marketing budget, right? You hire him and he makes all this collateral. He's like, I've got game pieces and collateral. He's really selling a full fantasy. He's like a full service marketing agency that's designing literal alternate reality games. But I think he's better at the marketing agency part than he is at the game part, honestly. He really should just be marketing for other villains. So he's got all these cards of the X-Men and he's like, and they're going to be dead. And so this brings us into the Arcade plot in the next two issues, which starts out with the X-Men are just out and about doing their thing. It seems like it's going to be another downtime issue. And they're basically hoovered up by like a trash truck with a vacuum hose on the back of it, which Spider-Man recognizes from his run-in with Arcade. And then also, you know, some of them go to the opera and the whole box of the opera is lifted out by helicopter. Banshee just gets shot with a dart. That's no fun. Storm gets shot with a dart. But so Arcade, again, he is good at some things, good at marketing, good at capturing people. He should be really selling these services to other villains and just getting out of the murder world thing. You got to play to your strengths. You know, there's this thought in business, like get stronger at your strengths. Don't try to make all your weaknesses stronger. Be just good at the things you're good at. He's not good at murdering people. Let's just put that out.
Not at all.
No.
Not at all. But I mean, this whole two issues was like, okay, whatever. Like, I mean, you know, maybe the readers at that time didn't know. I know that they're gonna be fine, you know. So it just like it wasn't the best. I mean, it's just it is.
Yeah,
it's just
I mean, these two issues is Claremont and Byrne reminding everyone, it's like, hey, we did this whole run about Marvel team up. It's time for you to go find them and read them, because it's like Spider-Man appears in the beginning of this arc, and Arcade appears because he captured Spider-Man and who's that? Captain Britain.
Well, I mean, I don't know all the background here, but I kind of assumed it was because that was popular. Like that people wrote in and wrote letters that they liked Arcade. I would have to go back and look at the letters pages from Marvel Team Up, which I don't think have been republished anywhere. Letters in the Masterworks, I do have Team Up Masterworks, but they're not that far. Anyway, answered. that I assumed that he was like, oh, arcade was fun. Like, let's bring him to X-Men, and people will be like, ooh, arcade. I don't know. Pure conjecture.
Yeah, whatever.
But I thought it was really fun. I mean, they even put in Doctor Strange home there. What's that?
Sanctorum.
Yeah, Sanctum Sanctorum. Yeah.
I guess there's only really one or two interesting things to talk about in here, but it's fun. I mean, it's again, this is only Arcade's second appearance. This is the first time people are seeing this. Now we're jaded. We've seen 100 villains put people in pinballs at this point. Like, it's not inventive. But at the time, this was cool. It was cool stuff. And it does lead to a couple of fun moments with the X-Men where they've kind of been challenged specifically. Wolverine in the Funhouse mirrors is kind of funny because it's like, what can Wolverine do against a challenge that's purely a mental challenge, and he can't use his tracking, and there's nobody really to slice up. Storm, gets played against the claustrophobia and also to just be in water where she doesn't have air, which is, and a lot of these challenges, by the way, are repeated in the Super Nintendo game of Spider-Man and the X-Men against Arcade, and the Storm challenge here is recreated very faithfully in the game, where she's like stuck underwater and you can only get up and take like a little breath at a time. Speaking of games that we played as kids. But the one really interesting plot beat here, I think, is the challenge he sets forth for Colossus, which is not a physical challenge, but a mental one, which he's not quite up to. He basically has somebody impersonate an agent of Homeland Russia and be like, you've got to come back home. And basically does maybe some hypnotizing, but also a fair bit of convincing to Colossus that he has a debt to pay to his home country. What did you all think about this plot beat?
That was the most interesting point of this, but could have been done in half an issue. You know what I mean? Like, or could have been done with, I don't know. I mean, so I recently read a story called Carpenter's Tale that was written by Paul Dini and in his Batman omnibus, which is pretty much from the point of view of the carpenter who builds the murder world. And that is so much more fun to read than this. Like, that was actually fun to read because she actually puts in things. She's like, oh, I don't want Batman to die because then I have a debt and all of that. And then, she kind of puts in things like how they can run away. So, and that was kind of more fun than this. But this is, I'm like, oh, another one of those, like, oh, I'm trapped. And I feel like we've seen this in the Carnival. We've seen this in like the Magneto's, thing. So it felt too recent for me to actually, get anything out of it other than the Colossus story. Because it's like, okay, so that's the doubt and everything we saw at the beginning of 121, right? Like that's the issue number. Yeah. So 122 is coming in play here. So I think that kind of made it better.
No, Tyler, what did you think?
I mean, it is a little bit similar to how Mesmero managed to nab the X-Men so easily. So it's just like X-Men cannot have downtime because every time they try to relax, they get like captured somewhere by someone. But I mean, the second issue, that means Uncanny X-Men 124, is actually the very first classic X-Men issue that I picked up.
Oh.
So you have some affinity for it.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of like nostalgia there, and because it's like the first time I get introduced to not the first time I read X-Men, because I've read a lot of X-Men before I started buying classic X-Men. So, but it was one of those stories that I've never read before, and I kind of enjoyed it. But I can see how a lot of these things is just like, it's just a kind of like a nothing story. So it's just a fight, and Colossus is definitely the only thing that is kind of significant here.
Well, I have a three. Why don't you go, and then I have a few thoughts on all this.
No, I mean, that's the thing. Like, it would have been nice if we haven't seen that whole thing played again and again over the last World Tour issues, right? Because it's just like a same thing. It's like, oh, they go somewhere. It's like, oh, we're gonna fight, and then we didn't fight it good enough. And like, no, now we're gonna fight good, and then we're done. And then just like an Arcade lets them go, and then it's like, oh yeah, you were nice, you were good, or the opponent. Here you go, X-Men 1, Arcade 0. I'm like, okay, Sure.
I mean, that was a little bit strange. The ending where
Right.
Arcade basically just let them go, put them into one big ball, and then just roll them somewhere. Yeah.
Yep.
I would say I have a comment kind of on that, and then stepping out of that into Colossus. That,
Mm.
early in this X-Men run, and really, in my opinion, right up until 160, there's like three kinds of issues, right? There's really truly plot significant issues that you have to read to really kind of get the whole fabric of Claremont. There's issues that are maybe not plot significant, but they still establish something that's reused and that is referenced, which I think this is. And then there's kind of just the totally random ones, like the Moses Magnum in Japan thing, where it's like very rarely referenced, not a key story, not really something you have to read to understand the X-Men. Not that it's never ever name checked again, but like you don't need to understand that to understand X-Men. Whereas Arcade pops up enough in enough different X-Men books that like it's kind of nice to have this reference of like, oh, the first time Arcade ever fought the X-Men is because Black Tom and Juggernaut hired Arcade. Like this is information that's useful to have. And I just think that, as much as people say, oh, read from the beginning of Claremont, like I'm always beating this drum, it doesn't turn into the kind of like everything is significant until 160. There's still issues like this where it's like, oh, cute. But then when you go back and read them all together, it creates this fabric of everything, because the thing that this really is about is Colossus. All three of these issues is Claremont trying to find a way to focus on Colossus really for the first time. And something that really strikes me in 122, and I want to hear you both respond to this, is he's now experienced a year or two since 2 Christmases have gone by of X-Men. What is it, right? Professor Xavier came to him with this, selling this bill of goods. Come to my school from the farm. I'm going to train you in your power. But we all know that Professor Xavier only really needed him to like break everybody out of Krakoa. That was the whole point of that. And to the extent that Professor Xavier has other incentives to have all the X-Men around, fine. But this is not a summit on that. What is Colossus really getting out of this? He's got some amount of training. He's seen the world. He's made some friends. But like, why should he stay here rather than go back and be with his family? And I think that that's really the interesting underlying question that starts out even before he's, convinced to be the proletariat hero here. And it is put a cap on by Claremont in this, I think, really brilliant classic X-Men story, which we can start weaving in some reactions to if you want.
Yeah.
And that's what's missing from here. There's no end. It's kind of just like, oh, ha ha ha, Colossus had doubts, and so they used him against us, but now he's better. But really, it's a much bigger story that needed him to return to Russia to finish it. So that's my diatribe. What did you think? My questions are: is there something in the X-Men for Colossus? And did we really need an end to this story that Claremont gives us in Classic 30? Fariha?
So the thing is, like, it's actually, I can relate to his thing, based on like, how he had to go back. And then when he go back, it's like, oh, this is not the
I'm sorry,
Russia I
29.
left.
I'm sorry. Classic X-Men 29. Continue.
No, I mean, this is not the Russia I left, or this is not the Russia I'm I'm nostalgic about. But then of all the people, and I think someone actually mentioned it within the story, he's the only one who had family.
Right.
His family was supportive. They actually loved him, and or love him still. And then it's like he comes from a tight-knit, close community. So for him, he doesn't see X-Men as family, or he doesn't need to see them as anything more than another group of friends, right? So I think it makes perfect sense that he is not interested into staying in X-Men. But then if you also look into the issue 29 story and all the things that's already going in Russia and stuff like that, Russia actually brainwashed their, I guess that's true for every country, in terms of like the nationalism, and then you have to fight for Russia and all of that. So I think that plays a little bit role, like a guilt that, oh, I left my country behind. So maybe that's, so it kind of makes perfect sense that he's having all these feelings. Do we need Arcade to figure that out? Probably not. But we got there, and we got to issue like the classic 29. So I'm glad, I'm glad that we got that, because without classic 29, it doesn't have the same depth.
Tyler, what did you think?
I agree with the point about the classic 29 giving it a lot more depth than what you have in these 3 issues. The problem, I mean, not problem, but like the thing with Colossus is that this it kind of establishes him here as the one who is in some way a little bit of an outsider, and the fact that he's, I mean, it comes way later. I mean, it comes into play way later when he passes through the Sage Perilous. So and then it sort of like ties in a little bit to what he actually wants, which is like, you know, a really simple life. And that story bit has been done many a times with Colossus, even like current era Colossus. Is like every time he gets sad or whatever, the next thing that they did with him was like, oh, he wants a simple life. He becomes a farmer. He becomes an artist, and you know, so in some ways, these three issues is not significant, but then in a bigger, you know, in the bigger scope of things, this sort of becomes the defining character of Colossus. That, you know, he's not someone with a huge ambition. He's not someone who wants to be like, oh, you know, I'm a superhero, I need to save the world. No, I think he is like, I want a simple life, a simple, happy life.
Well, I think it's interesting because the thing that pulls him out in this arcade issue is basically the power of love. He's cured of communism by the power of love of his friends. But that really reflects where his values lie, right? His values lie in family and in love and in relying on each other. You know, we have this long going plot about how Storm views him as a brother and he views Nightcrawler as a brother. And being cured of this hypnotism by the power of love is kind of like him going like, gosh, there's people that I loved already, and I haven't even done any. I've even stopped sending them letters. And so we roll into Classic X-Men 29, where Storm flies him across the North Pole and drops him off in Russia. And he goes back to visit the family farm, and his family are delighted to have him back. It's one of the most heartwarming homecomings that any X-Men character has ever received, really. And the thing that becomes interesting about it is, you know, there's a runaway truck, and it's going to explode very similarly to the ways he expresses his powers in the original Giant Size X-Men with the tractor. We get to see little Ileana. We all get excited by that. And in using his powers to save their kind of little commune from the truck exploding and burning down their farm, everybody's really happy with him. Nobody's discriminating against him for being a mutant. But the KGB gets wind of that, and they're like, well, you've defected, so we've got to take you into custody, because not only for defecting just as anybody, but defecting as a mutant who could be serving your country. But then there's this other really interesting point, and then I'll turn it over to the two of you, that comes out in his conversation with who I think is a pretty ethical, moral KGB agent here, which is, you're upset because all your friends got sent to war and died, and you feel bad about that. But we could have never sent you to war, because that would unbalance our relationship with America in the Cold War. We've agreed we're not going to send superpowered people into war. So we would put you to good use. Don't worry. But your fate was never going to be their fate. You were never going to be on the battlefield to save them. That was never an option for you. And in a way, that kind of absolves him of this guilt, because he realizes he was not destined for the life that all the other young kids on his commune were ever going to be destined for. That's a lot. And it's a lot built into immigrant chat here that we have with the three of us. Fariha, what do you think of that whole Colossus story?
No, I mean, everything that you said is true. And then we also recently, I was actually kind of thinking about, because the soldier who tells him that, oh, you left or you defected, you know, right. I think it's like one of the neighborhood like he grew up with, his friend he grew up with, and he didn't have an arm. So I was actually kind of thinking about Punisher Soviet, a new 6-issue max series that Garth Ennis wrote, because that is actually based on that war. Yeah, it's based on that Russia-Afghanistan war. And then there was a soldier out of that who works with Punisher in present day to take care of some business. But the thing is, the portrayal of that, and actually because, Ennis is very good at writing war story, and some of the things that they have written or that they have show over there, it's vicious. So I completely understand where the soldier is coming from, because they did not have a good, nothing worked for them. It was like a lot of things that was going wrong. but the thing is that at the same time, it makes sense that he is someone with his power manifests in, like, in physical strength, right? Something that is perfect for war situation, and he wasn't there. So it just, like, he was already feeling guilt, he already having doubt, and then that happened, so that just kind of validated his doubt until he met that one KGB agent. And thank God for that, because if it was someone else, we would never see Colossus again.
Yeah, that would
But
be
then,
the end of Colossus.
Yeah, that would be the end of Colossus. So yeah, I think, like, he kind of got permission to go be an X-Men.
Tyler, what did
But
you
then,
think? Oh, sorry. Didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, and the last thing I was gonna say though is, Eliana is like, yeah, I want to be a mutant. I'm like, oh girl, you have no idea what's coming your way.
She's like, when do I get my armor? I'm like, oh
yeah, like,
touchy subject.
Oh, girl, don't ask for that.
Tyler,
be a kid.
Well, I mean, this is also, I mean, on the point on Ileana, it's like she's also this is also written post whatever happened to magic, so Claremont could see that those interesting things there. Yeah, I mean, I just like, I mean, I like the story. I'm not sure about the whole international agreement thing. Like, did it stem from the fact that, like, Captain America was in World War II, and therefore they are like, oh, no more superheroes in conflicts like that, and yeah, I don't know.
Or was he lying? I mean, I don't know about the history of Marvel, like, in that era, to know that if there was any other another superheroes that was actually in war.
Yeah.
I really read it as a Cold War thing, and I have no support on that from any other books. I'm sure if Avengers of that period maybe probably would have some comments on it, but I kind of just saw it as like a deproliferation thing of, like, we won't bring our super soldiers if you won't bring yours. Maybe also it's an Iron Man, because Iron Man often fights with Crimson Commando, but and also Black Widow. But I don't know anything past that speculation, because I don't really know late 70s, early 80s Marvel super well outside of X-Men.
And I mean, the thing that, like, struck me was, like, this wasn't a story where he showed his powers and everyone was like, oh, this is a mutant, let's chase him down. Like, we are not in that era yet, so it's more like, oh, you use your power to save to save us from the explosion, everyone is happy, and then of course then comes the question of, like, why are you not there to save me when we were fighting, like, a war and things like that. I like it, the story. That's all I can say about this. And we the previous episode we talked about patriotism, and this story did strike that kind of chord with me, like, thinking about being patriotic to your own country, and how it affects your view of things and what you do. And I think very significant to me would be the what do you call that, the regret, or the fact that you feel like you owe your parents because you're not there for them. Is a feeling that I get really strong from this story as well, as in, like, I'm not there for you because I'm away doing something else, and the feeling of, like, that you owe them something, because they are your parents, they took care of you when you were younger, and like, even though you are you even though they don't really need you to take care of them now, but you're not there actually, and that makes me that sometimes have that particular thing that makes me feel like I am I'm not filial to them. The whole concept of filial piety plays into this whole thing. So yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of that feeling here. Yeah.
I think, I mean, I find this fascinating. This actually is one of my favorite classic backups. I would say if you're a Colossus fan, this is a must read. I think this really establishes a lot of things about his character. And, he, as we've all commented upon, he's kind of absolved of needing to stay. The agent basically says, I couldn't hold you anyway, so leave if you're going to leave. Really interesting to contrast with what happened with Wolverine in the Alpha Flight story that we covered last episode, where they're like, you don't have a choice. You are an agent of the government. You are coming with us. But he still could easily leave and did. But here it's kind of the opposite side of that. I think the one point we didn't really touch on is his art, right? Which hasn't really been a huge point in Claremont's original Uncanny run, but he's inserting a lot in these issues because he knows that he's going to be continuing to use that plot. And the way it's his way of trying to share his American life and his fantastical life with his parents. And when they look at his art, they almost don't believe it. Like, they know that he's an X-Men, they understand he's on adventures, but they can't tell the difference between the heightened reality of the art and what's real life. And I think that really struck me in a similar way to what Tyler's talking about in terms of, filial responsibility, is that as you kind of grow older and you have different experiences than your parents, and your life is separate from your parents, it's hard sometimes to like tune them into the reality of who you are, whether that's something about your identity or something about the challenges that you're facing or your career or your family or whatever. And it's kind of like they still can't tell the difference between a story that a kid would tell them and the reality of your life. Maybe some of your parents do, maybe if you have a good relationship with your parents, but that's something I definitely have experienced and have friends that experience. And it's like, here, there's no judgment, right? They still take the pictures and they're beautiful pictures, and they don't ask a lot of questions about it. But it just kind of really resonated that like once you leave home, it's often the fact that your reality never really is the same reality as your parents' reality ever again.
Right. So as of right now, Rasputin's and the Guthries are the only accepting parents in mutant world that I found.
There's a few others. I mean, Jean's family is pretty cool with Jean. Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
and then
Cyclops' family, yeah.
Well, Cyclops is, because he's just jet setting in Alien, so he doesn't quite have to say.
Well, his grandparents are quite nice, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, I'm keeping count in the number of accepting mutant parents, and there's not a lot.
Now wait until you meet Iceman's parents. They're a trip.
Yeah. Oh. Okay. Well, he did go on a dinner with them, right? I think they're like semi getting there kind of thing.
Well, depending on which, like you're talking about the Sina Grace.
No, I just meant from the Iceman miniseries from the 80s, where he like goes back home and they're like, what a loser you are. Why don't you just be an accountant?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, couldn't you try not being a mutant? Which of course is, anyway, we're going to get to that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, he's an Omega power mutant.
Yeah, but just try to not be. So there is one more Classic X-Men issue to fit in here, which is Classic X-Men 30. It's a Arcade basically gives himself a therapy session in Murder World. In the actual X-Men issues here that we read, basically Arcade is the son of like this super rich person, and he gets kicked out for not making anything of himself when he becomes an adult. And so he's like, oh, I'm going to make something of myself. And so he makes Murder World. I like to like in my head picture what that would be today. Like if we were doing like Ultimate Marvel Universe and we were remaking Arcade for 2021, like I feel like he would be like an over the hill TikTok influencer. But anyway, that's just something that popped into my head. So basically this is him encountering that he suffered a lot more abuse at the hands of his father. And I don't know that it's trying to absolve or explain Murder World. It's just saying, and he's a murderous, game playing crazy person. Maybe he's always been that, but he also had a tough childhood. Is there anything else really to say about this Arcade backup story?
It's just that, like, if you really want something weird and creepy, just get Ann Nocenti to write it.
Yeah, Ann Nocenti's weird. She's strange. She wrote both of the creepy issues that we didn't have great feelings about before. She wrote a very strange run of Daredevil. Yeah. So look,
I met Ann Nocenti.
Is she creepy in real person? Did you get creepy vibes?
I mean, she is like very much of 70s hippie. I was like, oh, that's like, she's like, but Louis Simonson, I was like, yeah, she would put someone in an egg because she didn't like them. So yeah, I think those two ladies, I mean, they become the editor later on and then it tracks.
Well, look,
from my 5-minute conversation with both of them.
No, but I do have a question. Like, did the both of you think that Arcade is like a
he's
teenager?
young. I think he's as young as the X-Men.
Okay.
I put him as like late 20s, early 30s.
Yeah, that was what I got from the original Arcade story. But this particular backup story placed him as way younger.
But isn't it his idea, like his imagination of him?
No, but
the present day one though.
Yeah, the present day one.
That's okay. Yeah. Okay. Maybe it's just the art.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of see it as he broke out on his own to start having this business, and he's not super well established, but he's known. So, like, if he was kicked out at 18 and he spent a couple years bumming around and gathering these resources, and then he built Murder World, I don't think he's older than like 25.
Got it.
I don't know. That's me. That's my take on it.
But in comic world, that means it's 21 because everyone is so established so fast.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Well, there you go. It's our first encounter with Arcade and the X-Men, and we've got this one wrapped now. For next time, we're going to be reading Uncanny X-Men Annual 3, which fits in here. It has to. It actually is a note in the issue.
It says that it happens.
It says.
But because that's only one issue, we are all going to throw in two other things. So one thing is Marvel Team Up 89, which we probably could have squeezed in before these classic X-Men issues, but it happens around the same time, and it's a Nightcrawler team up with Spider-Man, and it's actually really like a full issue Nightcrawler story. So we're going to move that into the next issue. And we're also going to tackle the backup from Classic X-Men 31. As Tyler, I think, alluded to earlier, it probably could have just been read right when we had that Professor Xavier cutaway scene in our first issue today. So we're going to read it in the next episode as well. So for next time, Uncanny X-Men Annual 3, which if you're looking for it on Marvel Unlimited, it's just under X-Men Annual 3, Marvel Team Up 89, and Classic X-Men 31 backup story. And the reason we get together and do this is because we have different recollections of it from the first time around, but especially the three of us and who we are today and kind of how this turns into immigrant chat. There's a lot of new things to say and feel about a story like the Colossus story here that makes it so much more than just the first Arcade story. And that's one of our favorite reasons to get together and do this, because why, Fariha?
X-Men is better when it's read together.
That's right. So we are so happy to be reading it together, the three of us, and we're so happy that you've chosen to come along with us on this journey. If you want to have a full X-Men reading order, just go to crushingcrisis.com. You can see the whole thing for the whole history of the X-Men and use that to read ahead if you want to. But we will see you next time here on the Epic X-Men Reread. And until then, be well.